I gazed at my reflection in the ornate mirror of the bridal suite, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. The elaborate white dress, adorned with pearls and lace that had cost more than my car, felt like a costume rather than a wedding gown. My hair was styled in perfect curls, my makeup flawless, and yet I felt nothing but a growing sense of dread. 20 minutes, Eliza, my mother called through the door, her voice tinged with the excitement I should have been feeling. Arizona's scorching June heat seemed to seep through the hotel walls, but the sweat beating on my forehead had little to do with the temperature. This wasn't pre-wedding jitters. This was my body screaming what my mind had been whispering for months. I was making a terrible mistake. Richard was perfect on paper, successful attorney, charming smile, and from a family my parents adored. We'd been together for 3 years, and when he proposed at his firm's Christmas party, I'd said yes because it seemed like the logical next step. But logic and love, I was discovering too late, weren't always aligned. The truth was simple and devastating. I didn't love him. Not in the way a bride should love her groom. And now, with 200 guests waiting downstairs and a $75,000 wedding about to begin, I finally admitted it to myself. My bridesmaid, Kelly, knocked and entered, carrying a glass of champagne. "Final toast before you become Mrs. Richard Harrington," she said with a smile that faltered when she saw my face. "Eliza? What's wrong? I can't do this." The words tumbled out, and with them came a strange relief. Kelly set down the champagne and took my hands. "Cold feet is normal. It's not cold feet. It's emptiness." I met her eyes. "I don't love him, Kelly." Her expression shifted from concern to understanding. Kelly had known me since college. She could see the truth in my eyes. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. I glanced at the window, then at the door. "I need to leave. Now, Eliza, think about this. I've been thinking for 3 years. That's the problem." I kicked off the satin heels and reached for my bag, extracting the running shoes I'd packed for the honeymoon. "Will you help me?" 20 minutes later, I was driving my old Jeep Wrangler away from the Phoenix resort, still wearing my wedding dress. I left my phone behind after sending one text to my sister. "I'm sorry. I'll explain everything later. Tell everyone I'm okay." I knew it wasn't enough, but I couldn't face the fallout, not yet. The desert stretched before me as I headed east on Interstate 10, then veered onto smaller highways. I had no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need for space and clarity. The dress bunched uncomfortably around the pedals, and I yanked at the fabric, tearing the delicate lace in my frustration. I drove until the sun began to set, painting the Superstition Mountains in hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful and terrifying, this vast wilderness that surrounded me. When the gas gauge dipped dangerously low, I pulled into a small town called Superior, found a motel, and paid cash for a room. The clerk barely raised an eyebrow at my disheveled appearance and torn wedding dress. This was Arizona, after all. People came to the desert for all sorts of reasons, many of them involving escape. That night, I sat on the stiff motel bed, the wedding dress crumpled in the corner, and wept until there were no tears left. Not for Richard. Our relationship had been dying for months, but for the chaos I'd created, the hurt I'd caused, and the uncertainty that now loomed before me. Morning came with harsh sunlight streaming through thin curtains. I had no plan, no change of clothes, and less than $300 in cash. But the panic I expected didn't materialize. Instead, I felt a strange sense of possibility. I walked to a nearby thrift store and bought jeans, a t-shirt, and hiking boots. The elderly woman at the counter smiled kindly. "Starting fresh, honey." Something like that, I replied, wondering how many runaway brides she'd seen in this small desert town. Back at the motel, I changed and studied my map of Arizona. Something drew me toward the Apache reservation lands to the east. Perhaps it was the desire to lose myself in a place where no one would look for me. Or maybe it was the pull of landscapes untouched by the expectations that had shaped my life. I filled the Jeep with gas and continued east, the road climbing into the mountains, carrying me further from my old life. The Sonoran Desert gave way to the higher elevations of pine forests as I approached the Fort Apache Reservation. By mid-afternoon, I reached the town of White River. Children played outside modest homes, and elders sat in the shade of front porches. I felt immediately conspicuous, an outsider with no purpose or connection here. What was I thinking, driving to a reservation where I knew no one? I parked near a small cafe and sat there, suddenly overcome with the reality of my situation. I had abandoned my wedding, hurt countless people, and now I was aimlessly wandering through Arizona with no plan. The facade of control I'd maintained since leaving Phoenix crumbled. Car trouble. A voice startled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see a woman about my age, her dark hair pulled back, wearing a t-shirt with the logo of the Tribal Health Center. "No," I said, wiping hastily at my eyes. "Just lost, I guess." She studied me for a moment. "You look like you could use some coffee. I'm heading into the cafe if you want to join." Her name was Nijoni, which she told me meant beautiful in Navajo, though she was Apache. She worked as a nurse at the reservation clinic and had an easy manner that made me feel less like an intruder. "So," she said after we'd settled with our coffees, "what brings a tourist to White River in June? Most folks stick to Sedona or the Grand Canyon." I hesitated, then decided the truth couldn't make my situation any worse. "I ran away from my wedding yesterday. In Phoenix." Nijoni's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't seem shocked. "That explains the new clothes tags you forgot to remove," she said, nodding toward the jeans I'd hastily purchased. I laughed despite myself, a small release of tension. I didn't exactly pack for this escape. "Sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we don't plan for," she said. "My grandmother would say you were following your spirit's guidance." Something in her words resonated with me. Perhaps I had been following some deeper instinct when I fled into the desert. Or perhaps I was just running from my mistakes. Either way, I was here now. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Nijoni asked. I shook my head. "I was going to find a motel, if there is one. There's a small inn at the edge of town, but..." She seemed to consider something. "My cousin Sarah rents out a cabin on her property. It's simple but private. Might be a better place to clear your head than a motel room with paper-thin walls." That's how I found myself driving down a dirt road, following Nijoni's truck to a small wooden cabin nestled among ponderosa pines. Sarah, a quiet woman with kind eyes, showed me the basics: the propane stove, the shower with somewhat reliable hot water, and the porch with a view of the mountains. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "We charge by the week. First one's paid for." She nodded toward Nijoni, who shrugged off my protests. "Consider it wedding gift redirection," Nijoni said with a smile. "Besides, you can help Sarah with her garden while you're here. She's been meaning to expand it." Left alone in the cabin that evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains in purple shadows. For the first time since I'd fled my wedding, I allowed myself to think about what came next. I couldn't hide forever, but I wasn't ready to face the wreckage I'd left behind. I need to call my sister eventually, let my family know I was safe. And Richard. The thought of talking to him filled me with dread and guilt. But the silence stretched in both directions. No one had my location, but I also had no idea what was happening in Phoenix. Were they looking for me? Had Richard guessed the truth, that this wasn't a kidnapping or accident, but a deliberate choice? The next morning, I woke to a knock at the door. Sarah stood there with a basket of fresh eggs, tomatoes, and bread. "Thought you might need breakfast," she said. "And Nijoni mentioned you might help in the garden today." Gardening had never been part of my life in Phoenix, where my apartment balcony barely had room for a chair. But there was something therapeutic about digging my hands into the earth, helping Sarah plant rows of beans and corn in the traditional Apache way. "Three sisters," she explained. "The corn provides the stalk for the beans to climb, the beans fix nitrogen in the soil, and the squash leaves provide ground cover to retain moisture and prevent weeds. They support each other," I observed. Sarah nodded. "Everything has a purpose, a way of giving and taking that keeps balance." As days turned into a week, I fell into the rhythm of life on the reservation. Mornings in the garden with Sarah, afternoons exploring the nearby forests, or helping at the community center where Najoni sometimes volunteered. In the evenings, I sat on my porch, writing in a journal, trying to make sense of the life I'd abandoned and the person I wanted to become. I finally called my sister from the tribal library's phone. The conversation was tearful and difficult. My family had been frantic despite my text. Richard had initially thought I'd been kidnapped, but my carefully packed suitcase and missing Jeep told the true story. "He's hurt and angry, Eliza," my sister said. "Everyone is. Mom and Dad don't understand why you didn't just call off the wedding before the day." I didn't understand myself until I was in that dress, I admitted. "Tell them I'm safe. I'll come home when I'm ready." "Where are you?" she asked. "Somewhere I needed to be," I answered, not ready to have my sanctuary invaded. "I'll call again soon." The more time I spent with Sarah and Najoni, the more I learned about Apache culture and history. They shared stories of their families, of traditions maintained despite centuries of attempts to erase them. I was humbled by their resilience and generosity toward a stranger who had stumbled into their lives. "Why are you being so kind to me?" I asked Najoni one evening as we sat by a small fire outside my cabin. "I'm not exactly a model of responsibility or courage, running away like I did." She poked at the fire thoughtfully. "In our traditions, we believe people come into our lives for reasons. Maybe you needed us. Maybe we needed you. What did you possibly need from me?" "Sarah hasn't worked that garden properly since her son left for college last year. You've helped her replant half of it." She smiled. "And I've enjoyed having someone new to talk to. Most of my friends have moved away for work." 3 weeks after my arrival, I received an unexpected visitor. I was weeding Sarah's garden when a tribal police SUV pulled up. A tall Apache man in uniform stepped out, his expression serious. "Elizabeth Mercer?" he asked. My heart raced. Had Richard somehow tracked me down? Was I in trouble? "I'm Officer Ben Tesseri," he said. "Your family filed a missing persons report. Your sister mentioned you called from this reservation." I straightened, brushing dirt from my knees. "I'm not missing. I left voluntarily." "I can see that." His expression softened slightly. "But procedures require me to confirm you're here by choice and notify your family that you've been located." "Please, I'm not ready. I don't have to give them your exact location," he interrupted. "Just confirmation that you're alive and well on the reservation." Relief washed over me. "Thank you." He nodded. "Mind if I ask why you came here, of all places?" I gestured to the mountains surrounding us. I needed somewhere different, somewhere I could think. "The desert has a way of clearing the mind," he agreed. "Just be careful. These mountains can be dangerous if you don't know them." After he left, Sarah emerged from her house. "Everything okay?" "I think so," I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Now that my family knew roughly where I was, how long before someone came looking? That evening, Najoni invited me to her family's home for dinner. Her parents lived in a modern house on the eastern edge of the reservation, with a spectacular view of the valley below. Her father, a tribal elder named Thomas, welcomed me warmly, while her mother, Marie, served a feast of traditional Apache dishes alongside modern favorites. As we ate, Thomas shared stories of the land, of the Apache people's connection to these mountains that stretch back centuries. He spoke of the warrior tradition, of resistance and adaptation, and of finding strength in knowing who you are. "The Apache way teaches us to face our battles," he said, "to know when to fight and when to make peace, but never to run without purpose." His words struck me deeply. Had I been running without purpose? Or was there something I was running toward, not just away from? "I don't know if I had a purpose," I admitted. "I just knew I couldn't stay." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the purpose reveals itself later. The important thing is to recognize it when it appears." The next day, Officer Tessie returned, this time without his uniform. He found me sitting by the small creek that ran behind Sarah's property. "My shift ended," he explained, sitting beside me on a fallen log. "Thought I'd check in, neighbor to neighbor." There was something about Ben that put me at ease. Perhaps it was his calm demeanor or the way he seemed comfortable with silence. We talked as the afternoon sun filtered through the pines, about the reservation, about his work as an officer, about my former life in Phoenix as a graphic designer. "You could do that work from anywhere these days, couldn't you?" he asked. The question opened a door I hadn't considered. Could I rebuild my life here, or somewhere like here, away from the expectations that had led me to nearly marry a man I didn't love? As July stretched into August, I established a new routine. I'd rented a laptop from the tribal college and reached out to some of my freelance clients, explaining my extended absence as a family emergency. Most were understanding, and work began to trickle in. I extended my stay at the cabin, paying Sarah properly now that I had income again. On weekends, Ben would sometimes invite me hiking, showing me hidden waterfalls and ancient petroglyphs carved into canyon walls. Najoni became the first real friend I'd had in years, someone who knew the real me, not the version I'd constructed to fit into Richard's world. One evening, as Ben and I watched the sunset from a high ridge, he asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Are you ever going back?" I pulled my knees to my chest, considering. Not to my old life, but I do need to face the people I hurt. He nodded. "Closure matters. For them and for you." "What would your Apache traditions say about someone who did what I did?" I asked. Ben smiled slightly. "That depends on the motivation. If you ran from fear, that's one thing. If you ran toward truth, that's another. Maybe it was both," I admitted. The next day, I called Richard. My hands trembled as I dialed the number from the tribal library phone. He answered on the second ring, his voice instantly recognizable and suddenly foreign. "It's me," I said. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Yes, I'm safe. I'm sorry, Richard. Not for leaving, but for how I left. You deserved better." "Why?" The single word contained months of hurt and confusion. "Because I didn't love you the way you deserve to be loved," I said, the truth finally spoken aloud to the person who needed to hear it most. I was going through the motions, trying to be someone I thought I should be. Another long silence. "I think I knew," he finally said, his voice quieter. Not consciously, but something was missing. I just didn't want to see it. We talked for nearly an hour, about the relationship we'd built on compromise rather than passion, about the future we'd planned that neither of us truly wanted. There were moments of anger and recrimination, but also moments of surprising honesty. "I've filed insurance claims for the wedding costs," he said near the end of our conversation. "Your parents' deposits will be refunded." "Thank you." It seemed inadequate for all the trouble I'd caused, but he accepted it with a sigh. "Goodbye, Eliza. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." That night, I sat with Najoni on my cabin porch, sharing the conversation and the weight that had lifted from my shoulders. "So what now?" she asked. "Will you go back to Phoenix?" I looked out at the mountains, now as familiar to me as the city skyline had once been. "No, but I need to see my family, explain things face to face." 2 days later, I drove my Jeep back toward Phoenix for the first time since my wedding day. The desert landscape felt different now. Not an escape route, but a connection between two parts of my life. The reunion with my parents was difficult but necessary. My mother cried. My father alternated between relief and disappointment. My sister simply hugged me and whispered, "I'm just glad you're okay." I spent 3 days in Phoenix, closing my apartment lease, collecting essential belongings, and saying goodbye to friends who were more understanding than I deserved. Kelly, my bridesmaid who had helped me escape, took me to lunch. "You look different," she observed. "Happier." I am, I realized. I'm finally figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be who everyone expects. When I returned to the reservation, Ben was waiting at Sarah's house. He helped me unload my few possessions into the cabin that now felt more like home than my Phoenix apartment ever had. "Welcome back," he said simply. September brought cooler temperatures and a decision. The tribal college needed a part-time graphic design instructor. With Najoni's encouragement, I applied and was hired despite being an outsider. My first class had just 6 students, eager to learn skills that could help them find work without leaving the reservation. I moved from Sarah's cabin to a small house closer to the college, though I still helped with her garden on weekends. Ben and I began dating officially, taking things slowly, both aware of the cultural differences and the healing I still needed to do. 1 year after my almost wedding, I stood with Najoni, Ben, and Sarah at a traditional Apache sunrise ceremony. As the first light touched the mountains, I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced in Phoenix. My grandmother would say your spirit has found its home, Najoni told me afterward. Do you think she'd be right? I asked. Najoni smiled. I think home isn't always where we're born or raised. Sometimes it's where we finally become who we're meant to be. Later that day, Ben took me to a hidden canyon where clear water pooled beneath a small waterfall. As we sat with our feet in the cool stream, he took my hand. I have something to ask you, he said. Not a proposal. Not yet, but a question about the future. My heart quickened. I'm listening. The Tribal Housing Authority is building new homes next year. As a tribal officer, I qualify for one. He met my eyes. Would you consider making a life here with me? Not just for now, but for good. A year ago, I had run from a commitment made for all the wrong reasons. Now, sitting beside this man who knew my flaws and my strengths, in this place that had helped me find myself, I faced a different kind of choice. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand. Not because I'm running from anything, but because I've found where I want to stay. That evening, as the sunset painted the desert in gold and crimson, I thought about the bride who had fled into the desert, terrified and lost. She had found more than escape in the Apache mountains. She had found a community, a purpose, and eventually a love built on truth rather than expectations. The desert had not simply hidden me. It had revealed me, stripped away the layers of compromise and conformity until I recognized the woman beneath. And the Apache people had not just found me. They had shown me how to find myself. As darkness fell over the reservation, I watched the stars emerge above the mountains that had become my home. The path that had led me here was unconventional and painful for many, but it had been necessary. Sometimes I realized the bravest thing isn't standing firm in a mistake, but having the courage to run toward an uncertain truth.